Well, we finally made it to the end of colon, and so we're going to talk about a few things with the colon. We're going to kind of hit some highlights. We're not going to get into a lot of gory, nasty details with the colon. But here's a diagram of the colon, and we'll be discussing the different anatomical parts of the colon that you need to know over on the anatomy side. But now the small intestine has been removed. The third section of the small intestine is the ileum, and so you do have a valve that opens and closes to admit the wastes that are left over from digestion out of the ileum and into the first section of the large intestine, which is called the cecum. And of course, the wall of the large intestine, the colon, is very muscular, and so you're going to have smooth muscle contractions within the wall that are going to squeeze the refuse left over from the small intestine upward this way, up the ascending colon, across the hepatic flexure, that's that turn you have near the liver, and then it gets squeezed across the transverse colon. Then we arrive over here at the splenic flexure. We squeeze on down the descending colon, and then we have this S-like curve here, the sigmoid colon, and finally we arrive in the rectum. And the rectum, at the very end of the rectum, at the anal canal, you have two sphincter circular muscles that are capable of contracting, of course, and you have an external anal sphincter and an internal one inside there. The internal one is, which you can't see, is involuntary, and so that's going to open and permit feces to enter the very bottom of the anal canal here without us having to will it to happen. The external anal sphincter is the sphincter that you control voluntarily when you are ready to defecate or release the feces. So that's kind of the brief rundown of the structure of the colon. The yellow membrane you see here, that's the mesentery. And you can actually see in there, there's your superior mesenteric vein, which is artery, I'm sorry, which has branched off of the descending colon. You can see there in the background. They're not showing us the inferior mesenteric artery, which would be down here lower. Okay, moving along. Oh, let's talk about a couple of other features on here. Let's see. Yeah, the Taenia coli, these little strips you see along the colon, those are muscular strips which also contract, smooth muscle contractions that help squeeze and propel the feces that are forming in the colon forward towards the rectum and the anal canal. These other little things that look like yellow fat droplets that are hanging off of parts of the colon, those are called epiploic appendages. And they're basically little compartments of serous membranes that are filled with fat, and apparently the function of those is not well understood. And don't forget, off of the cecum over here, you do have the appendix, little compartment over there. The whole colon has lots and lots and lots of intestinal bacteria that live along the lining, and the appendix contains those bacteria as well. Some people think the appendix is like a reservoir for those intestinal bacteria. So if for any reason you lose some of your bacterial population in the colon, those that are hanging out over here in the appendix are a source for sort of reseeding the inner lining of the colon. When you take microbiology, you'll learn about how those bacteria do lots of nice beneficial things for you. They do help digest some things that we don't actually have the enzymes to properly and fully digest, and they also do things for us like make vitamins that we can't make ourselves. So those bacteria are hanging out there doing some nice things for us. All right, digestive processes in the large intestine. Now just remember, your nutrients were completely digested and absorbed in the small intestine, and most absorption happened before you even get to the ileum section of the small intestine. It occurs in the duodenum and the jejunum. The residue remains in the large intestine for about 12 to 24 hours, so it takes a while to get squeezed up and over and down and around. You don't really have any additional digestion, but you do have enteric bacteria. Enteric, when you see that, that's referring to the intestinal tract. And so there are bacteria there that can digest some certain kinds of carbohydrates, for example, that we don't have the enzymes to break apart. Our intestinal bacteria can break some of those down for us, even to the point where we can absorb some of those nutrients. And some of that is how helpful some of these bacteria are the focus of more and more intense studies. So probably not too far down the road, we're going to find out that those enteric bacteria are playing a much bigger role maybe in our digestive processes than we ever imagined. Vitamins, there are vitamins that are made, not all of them, but some vitamins. You have to take in vitamins from your diet. While our cells don't make vitamins, vitamins are coenzymes. They're molecules that help enzymes perform their functions, so you got to have them. And we can't make them. We take them in from our diet, but there are some types that are actually made by the bacteria that live in the colon. So vitamins do get absorbed in the colon. Water, electrolytes can be absorbed in there as well. So not all of the water and electrolytes are taken in the small intestine. There are some that are left over for the colon to absorb. But the major function of the colon is simply to, suck out the rest of the water and the electrolytes that you need to reclaim, and some of those vitamins as well. And you're compacting, forming the feces, and sending those on down to the anus for defecation. You can survive without your colon because you've absorbed adequate nutrients before anything reaches the colon. So that's why people, if they have a colostomy, if for some reason they have to have the colon removed, or a major portion of the colon removed, the feces that have been generated from the digestive tract can just be diverted into a bag that's attached to the side of the body. A homeostatic imbalance of the colon that you'll hear people mention, diverticulitis. Let's talk about that. This tends to occur in people who have a low fiber diet. Fiber, when you hear about fiber, what is fiber? Fiber consists of complex carbohydrates, so chains of sugars, sometimes branching chains of sugars that are in a pattern such that we don't have the enzymes to break them down. So many of these just pass through the intestinal tract in an undigested format. So quite a few plants are, if you guys know, you hear about what's high in fiber. Whole grains, fruits, and vegetables have a lot of fiber in them, these carbohydrates that we can't really digest. And those seem to be very important for good health, proper intestinal tract function. Now, the American diet, though, typically is low in fiber, and that can lead to the colon becoming narrow, which causes the contractions to be stronger in the colon. That puts increased pressure along the walls. And unfortunately, what can happen, that mucosal lining there can actually form pouches. It'll actually kind of bubble out like you see over here and over here and over here. And presses out almost like an aneurysm in a blood vessel. You have a little herniation. That's like a hernia at a microscopic level, pushing through the wall of the large intestine. That's not to say when somebody have a hernia, I just thought of that, I probably need to clarify. If somebody says they have a hernia, the small intestine usually has herniated, it has pushed through the abdominal muscles and is actually pressing up against the underlying skin. Or in males, the small intestine, a pouch of it, can wind up down in the scrotum, and that's another location where a hernia can occur. So here, a hernia, we're talking about down at a very small level, a portion of the inner lining of the colon pushing through the wall of the colon and forming a herniation. Those herniations are called diverticula. This condition is called diverticulosis, most common in the sigmoid colon. If you're over 70, about half of the population has at least some of these. Diverticulitis is when these become inflamed, so they can actually become damaged or infected, and then you have swelling and increased blood flow and so forth. And unfortunately, if they rupture and leak, the bacteria that are in here along the inside lining of the colon can then get into the peritoneal cavity, that fluid, and you're not supposed to have bacteria in that fluid. And once the bacteria get in there, they can spread and travel to other parts of the abdominal pelvic cavity where they're not supposed to be, and they can cause life-threatening infections. Okay, so defecation, the release of feces. The muscles of the rectum have to contract to expel the feces, and we're not going to get into the nervous system control of defecation. Your textbook provides more of those details if you have a burning desire to study it. One thing that assists defecation, Valsalva's maneuver, that's one of those things I've asked you to research when you are going through the respiratory system, because this can actually be used as well to help slow down rapid heartbeats because of the pressure it creates, and influences those baroreceptors that you have in the aorta and the carotid sinuses, which are so important for short-term control of blood pressure. Valsalva's maneuver is where the glottis, so your vocal cords, your vocal folds, close, and they function more or less like a sphincter, and they block air from being pushed out of the trachea. Then you contract the diaphragm, you contract your abdominal wall muscles. That increases the intra-abdominal pressure, and so that helps force the feces out during defecation. I'm sure we can all imagine what we've all experienced the Valsalva's maneuver, even if we didn't know what it was called before. The levator ani muscles that are down in the very bottom bowl of the pelvic cavity also contract, and that helps lift the anal canal, and that allows the feces to leave the body. All right, so that was our very rapid run through of the colon. The last two lectures for this unit will contain some information from chapter 24. We're going to leave most of chapter 24 out just because we don't have the time to devote to that chapter. But chapter 24 is actually a very interesting chapter on nutrition. If you have an interest in that subject, you certainly might want to take a closer look at it. But I do want to spend some time talking about how lipids are processed and how lipids travel around in the bloodstream and some of the problems that are associated with that, because we hear about lipid transport and lipids in the blood and other body fluids pretty frequently, and we get tested for those throughout our lifetime because they play such important roles in health, and especially cardiovascular function. So I am going to devote a couple of lectures to talking a little bit more about how lipids are handled within the body after you absorb them from the small intestine, and that'll finish up Unit 4.